Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Northside Church online service. We're going to start with a couple announcements. So we want to tell you what's going on around here. We've had a lot going on with our youth and children's programs. Last week, the kids and the families went wild during a team scavenger hunt. They found clues around their houses and had to battle it out for the highest points. My personal favorite was the challenge to have a pillow fight with a stranger. The kids also met this past Wednesday for a rock painting event where they learned about being missionaries in their neighborhood. The Aligned Student Ministry continues to meet on Wednesday nights, so be sure to send your youth students to that. We're getting really excited about our return to live in-person services on Sunday mornings here, starting October 18th. This will be here at the church out on the grass, and it's going to be an awesome time of fellowship, so please don't miss out. Yesterday was our annual Children's Ministry Yard Sale. Thank you to everyone who supported this event. From shoppers to donators to volunteers, we really appreciate all of your help. Now let's enter into a time of praise and worship. Psalm 100, 1-5 says, "Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name. For the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations." Now we invite you all to sing at home with us.
I was blind, now I'm seeing in color. I was dead, now I'm living forever. I have failed, but you were my redeemer. I've been blessed beyond all measure. I was lost, now I'm found by the Father. I've been changed from a ruin to treasure. I've been given a hope and a future. I've been blessed beyond all measure. I am counting every blessing, counting every blessing, letting go and trusting when I cannot see. I am counting every blessing, counting every blessing. spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you gave yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. When I was your foe, still your love conquered me. You have been so, so good to me. And I felt no word, you paid it all for me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, will you give yourself away? Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, will you give yourself away? Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
Hello, my name is Jana Joke, and I'm here to give you my testimony. I was raised in a Southern Baptist home. I asked Jesus to be my Lord and Savior when I was a child. Every Sunday, we went to church at my family's church on my father's side until my parents moved away from the church, and eventually my parents stopped going to church regularly. I started attending church sporadically, mainly with my grandparents and in holidays. And then in my 20s, I would attend different churches, trying to find my way back to church. Despite not attending church regularly, I felt like I had a strong faith and belief that would carry me throughout my life. And I really, truly believed didn't really need to go to church. I would be fine with just what my background was. I spent my early adult life on autopilot about my faith and my beliefs. I didn't think about it. I knew what was right and wrong. But my faith, I found, was being tested, looking back now, was being tested over and over, and I really didn't even realize it was. In my 20s, I began surrounding myself around people who did not share the same faith as me, although they knew what right and wrong was, but they just did not have that faith and that belief. Or they were like me and not practicing their faiths on a regular basis. My parents taught us to be kind, to help others, work hard, and live a modest life. And I wanted to teach those same values to my children. I felt my role was to raise my children to be functioning adults. They're not my kids. My role is to raise them to be adults. My daughter, she's in her second year of medical school. And my son, he will be completing his bachelor in nursing next year, and his goal is to be a nurse anesthetist. I'm very proud of my children. They are kind and they are caring to others, and they've worked hard for where they're at right now in their career path. And I'm proud to say their accomplishments have really been on their own merits. My husband and I, we provided them guidance and acceptance to let them to be where they're at today. But I will tell you, it wasn't always easy raising my children. When my children started school, I became friends with other moms at school. I volunteered at school. I participated in their activities. My life was about my children, my husband, and work. It became very stressful trying to be the best wife, mother, employee. Everyone around me was telling me, you need to do this, you need to do that, and to be a better woman, for your children to succeed. I mean, it just was a very stressful life. I started going with a group of mothers to happy hour to have a drink. Then we'd talk about wine. I felt meeting these women who were struggling with the same things I did was an outlet to distress, but it really wasn't. It was the slippery slope to become dependent upon alcohol to escape stress. And I soon realized this is not what I needed to cope. I realized I needed to stop the behavior, and I needed to take a really hard look at my life and get off the merry-go-round of trying to maintain a perfect life and pleasing others. I still struggle to let go of that image of the near-perfect woman, and I needed to change, and I found myself struggling with what that change would look like. Instinctively, I knew I needed to let God back into my daily life, and I needed to stop living on autopilot. After my mother died, my father started attending church again, and I would attend church with him occasionally. I would have conversations with my father about, I'm going to start going to church with you every week. I still didn't do this. I had excuses. I was busy. My children, work. It was just excuses. After my dad died, I realized I needed to stop making excuses. I started attending Northside Community Church. This is my dad was attending here. And I found myself getting connected to God again. I stopped living on autopilot. Even though I still have my struggles, Through my faith and belief in God and in Jesus, I am learning to let go of the things I can't control. I am so thankful for the support of the pastors Tim and Ed and the Northside community church family for the guidance on my journey back to God in Jesus. And I really don't think I'd be here where I am today if it wasn't for all the experiences I've had in my life. And I'm very thankful that I've finally found my way back.
Good morning, church family. I got 2 pieces of scripture for you this morning. The first one comes from 1 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. And the second one comes from 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 5 through 23. So here's the first one. After the Philistines had captured the ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod, brought it to the temple of Dagon, and placed it next to his statue. When the people of Ashdod got up early the next morning, there was Dagon, fallen with his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and returned him to his place. But when they got up early the next morning, there was Dagon, fallen with his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. This time, Dagon's head and both his hands were broken off, lying on the threshold. Only Dagon's torso remained. That is why, still today, the priests of Dagon and everyone who enters the temple of Dagon in Ashdod do not step on Dagon's threshold. The next portion, 2 Samuel 6. David and the whole house of Israel were dancing before the Lord with all kinds of fir wood instruments, lyres, harps, tambourines, sistrums, and cymbals. When they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah reached out to the ark of God and took hold of it because the oxen had stumbled. Then the Lord's anger burned against Uzzah, and God struck him dead on the spot for his irreverence, and he died there next to the ark of God. David was angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah, so he named that place Outburst Against Uzzah, as it is today. David feared the Lord that day and said, "How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me?" So he was not willing to bring the ark of the Lord to the city of David. Instead, he diverted it to the house of Obed-Edom of Gath. The ark of the Lord remained in his house 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and his whole family. It was reported to King David, "The Lord had blessed Obed-Edom's family and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." So David went and had the ark of God brought up from Obed-Edom's house to the city of David with rejoicing. When those carrying the ark of the Lord advanced 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened calf. David was dancing with all his might before the Lord, wearing a linen ephod. He and the whole house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of ram's horn. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Saul's daughter, Michal, looked down from the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent David had pitched for it. Then David offered burnt offerings, the fellowship offerings in the Lord's presence. When David had finished offering the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of armies. Then he distributed a loaf of bread, a date cake, and a raisin cake to each one in the entire Israelite community, both men and women. Then all the people went home. When David returned home to bless his household, Saul's daughter, Michal, came out to meet him. "How the king of Israel honored himself today," she said. "He exposed himself today in the sight of the slave girls of his subjects like a vulgar person would expose himself." David replied to Michal, "I was before the Lord, who chose me over your father and his whole family to appoint me ruler over the people of Israel. I will dance before the Lord, and I will dishonor myself and humble myself even more. However, by the slave girls you spoke about, I will be honored." And Saul's daughter Michal had no children to the day of her death.
Good morning, Northside, friends and family. Hope you enjoyed that testimony as much as I did. October 4th, that means in 2 weeks, we will be directly south of where I'm at right now in the field for church service. So we certainly want you to come and bring your lawn chair and meet us for church. We'll start having the ability to have church with each other. So today we're still in the story of David. We've moved on. Last week we talked about the death of Saul and what that means for us and what we can learn from that. And but we also know that this figure David, that the stories that we hear are, in some sense, almost not practical for us. Because in the sense that they're having wars and that culture is so different, there's so many things about it that we don't connect with. But in fact, that was reality for them. And we have the reality we're living with now too. And so I think that's one thing. The Bible doesn't take away the bad stuff. It tells you everything of what was going on so we can trust. Really, that's how you know if somebody's being truthful, if they'll tell you everything that happened. So here is David. And David has, Saul is gone, so now David is moving into the kingship. He's going to be king now. Remember, he was for 13 years. He was running from Saul. He could not be king, and God had anointed him king. But now David is king. He's in Judah, and we're in chapter 6 of 2 Samuel, and you could follow along there. And we're coming to a point where David is trying to consolidate, get stuff together, get his kingship together. And so he has some ideas, and then comes this story of this thing called the ark. I want to say to all of you out there, in the Bible there are 2 arks. And I want to tell you this too. Ark means box. There are 2 arks. This could be like a Bible trivia question. Number 1, there's Noah's ark. What was that? That was a big box full of animals surrounded by a boat floating on water. That was called the ark too. And this ark is a box that is really, it's God's box. That would be a better way to say it's God's box. So when we say ark, just remember it's a box. It's a 4x2x4 box. Got some gold on it, got a few things in it. Manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the 10 Commandments. There's some things in it. So it's just a box. It's got some things in it. It's got gold on it, so it looks fancy and nice, and that is the ark. And so David decides that he wants to get the ark because the ark represented God's presence. That's what it represented for Israel. And so David decided that he wants to go get the ark. He hears about it at someone's house, so he gathers up. It says 30,000. If you look there in verse 1 in chapter 6, it says David, all of Israel went. He got people to play instruments. He took a lot of troops. You know, it names all the instruments in verse 5, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. And so it was going to be a noisy parade. And so as we look at this story of David going and get the ark, there's some really great things we can learn about it. First of all, we're going to look at David's desire for the ark, the danger of the ark, which we'll see clearly, the deliverance of the ark, and finally, the dance of the ark. So here's David. He wants to get the ark into Jerusalem so he can consolidate, and David has, in some sense, a more of a desire for God than we saw in Saul. Saul seemed to drift mainly toward being about Saul himself, but David had interactions with God that kept him closer, just like we heard about 2 weeks ago in his Ziklag. And so he was aware of God's sovereignty and presence. So there's this enormous military musical gathering, and they go down. It's a parade. It's joyful. They're singing, and they go to get the box. It's made of acacia wood. And it was also known as the throne, or even sometimes the footstool of God, because it's a box. And what else would you use that for? And so, and that box, though, came from, and David wanted that box because he wanted God represented where he was at. He wanted things centered on God. He didn't want to try and be all that for people, which a lot of people want to do, kings, presidents, you know. And so, where was the ark? Okay, so the ark originally was in a place called the Holy of Holies. And it was kept inside there. It was in a tent that Israel had. Okay, this is You can read about all this in Exodus and all those books with Moses. It was kept in the tent, and it was kept back in the back of the tent behind curtains, and it was called the Holy of Holies. And once a year, a priest would go in there after he had washed, after there had been sacrificial animals, and he would go in there once a year to ask for forgiveness for Israel, to make offerings, and go to God for forgiveness. Matter of fact, this last week, which you see as a Jewish holiday, Yom Kippur, is the Day of Atonement. That's the day they would go in. So we just passed that in September, and that is still celebrated in some sense among Jewish people. So here is, so the ark has a funny history. That box has been all over. So God's box kind of went everywhere. And I guess I want to say to you also that, remember, a lot of the people that we look at in the Bible were pre-literate. They didn't read. Only a small percentage did. And so I really think you could think about God's box, the ark, as a giant object lesson. Because if people saw stuff, they knew it meant something, and when we see things in objects, it helps us understand in our minds, and if we can't use words for it, pictures, paint a picture. So the ark had been all over the place. The ark at one point was captured by the Philistines, and they thought it was a lucky rabbit kind of thing to get God's box. But when it went in there, it began to give them tumors, i.e. cancer, others, and people died, and there was all kinds of stuff that happened. At one point it says that they put the ark, and we read about that, they put the ark in their God's temple, and they'd come every morning, and their God would be knocked over, and its head would be broke off, and it'd be laying in front of the box, God's box. So when David found out that the ark, where it was, he wanted to go get it. And it was at Abinadab. And remember, and a good way to think about that was Saul never, attempted to do that. He just left it there after after the Philistines captured it. So David comes to power. He wants that there. It might be social, political, but for David, David also wanted God. And remember the Psalms that we read. I think of, as the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longs for you. David had a relationship with God. I kind of think that was generated in his younger years when the Spirit came upon him. That would be, God became real to him as a young shepherd boy, and he learned to work with God in his life. For David, God was the center of everything. David wasn't the center of everything. For Saul was the center of everything. But for David, he was pretty sure he wasn't the center, that in fact God was. It's like the solar system. We have one sun. Everything revolves around it. And when the sun is removed, gravity's gone, everything goes haywire. That might be a way to think about it. So David wanted to have access to God, and he also wanted the people to have access. He was very much about the people, which is another good thing about David. And so he desired God, and that's why he went to get the ark. Second thing was the danger. Now this little scene where we see, when they go to get, with their big parade that David started, and he's going to go get the ark and bring it up, we see something happen that disturbs almost all contemporary readers, our modern sensibilities, enlightened folks that we are. It disturbs us, Western readers. But basically, it's the Uzzah story. What happened to Uzzah? He died. And it says God killed him. God smote him. That's the Old Testament word. God smote him. So, how did that work? What went on there? You can see what happened in the little story. It's best said right there. It says that they had put the ark on a cart. Okay? They put the ark on a cart, and it was an oxen cart. And so you don't really ride on oxen carts. You really just maybe put your hand on the cart and walk alongside them, and everything's bumpy. They didn't have paved roads. It's dirt paths that have developed into quasi-roads. It's rough. And I grew up in the country. A lot of our roads were really rough. They're rough. And so Uzzah's just walking alongside the ark, and then David's up front, and there's music playing, and there's soldiers, and they're headed to Jerusalem, and everything is so cool. And then they hit a bump, and the ark started to slide off. And it says that Uzzah reached out and took a hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. And it says the Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his, it names it, irreverent act. Therefore, God struck him down and he died right there. So God struck Uzzah down, and David immediately gets angry. And he's angry with God. He's angry with himself. He's angry. He doesn't know why this has happened. He's confused. And we know he's confused because he says in verse 9, he says clearly, how can the ark of the Lord ever come to me? If we can't touch it, if we can't move it, how can it come to me? David is confused and angry like a lot of us get when we're angry about something. We get more confused. Some people hear this story, they see this story, and certainly with our love of tolerance that knows no bounds here in America, tolerance except for people we disagree with, we don't tolerate those, but the way we see ourselves, it's when we see this, I think people react. They say, this is precisely why I want nothing to do with Christianity, because this archaic stuff of God killing people, making Uzzah die, this too wrathful a God, too judgmental. I can't really do that. But, I have to say a few things about that this morning. I want to say to you and saying to me, really, saying to all of us. Gravity is something that exists. It has no emotion. It does the same thing every time. 32 feet per second, stuff drops always, no matter where you're at in this world. And you have to respect it. Now you can say, I think gravity is a little judgmental. I think I ought to be able to fly and do funny stuff. But, gravity, and so you can argue all you want with it, but if I go out and get on top of this sanctuary and jump off it, probably I'm going to be over at urgent care, and people are going to say, what did Tim do? He jumped off the building. It's so stupid. Because we know. You say, now gravity is pretty judgmental. Well, gravity is just gravity, and God's just God. God is how He is. And that's why when you have unbiblical information about God, and that's why when you move away from the Scriptures, and Christian groups have done that, you start creating your own God, the one you like, the one you make up, the one I make up. And it's never the biblical God. You can make up a Jesus. A lot of people try to recruit Jesus to their cause and turn him into exactly often themselves. So here is God, and Uzzah dies, and it is strange, and when I was thinking about that, when I was thinking about Uzzah walking alongside that cart, and he starts to see that thing slip, and then he sees the oxen, get in a gopher hole or something, and he reaches out. I guess in Uzzah's mind, he was maybe thinking, we don't want to get dirt on this box, right? I mean, you can't have dirt on there, but it says it was an irreverent act. There was something about it, and he touched it. And so the fact that we understand that dirt is just dirt, but people are people, and that we have something in us that is different than God significantly, and that God is holy and we're not. Jesus really does those things in the New Testament where he speaks to people directly about their sinful natures and even saying that you're evil. He says this about it, and that sounds funny to us, but to God it's not. And so he thought it got on the dirt to be contaminated. He didn't know that the real contamination was him. And it was in his very attitude. And it does say something about playing with religion, doesn't it? About our attitudes about it. And so David frustrated that he was, and it reminds me of when all my marriage career with our kids, we put together toys, I put together so many things, and I'm going to confess to you right now, I never ever look at the instructions. I just kind of lay everything out, but then after so many frustrating things, I remember putting a desk together down in Anaheim. My wife and I lived in Anaheim. I worked down a church down there, and I put this desk together for our apartment, and one large side of the desk was completely on backwards, and nothing worked because of that. Because I just went ahead and put it together because I know better. And I refused to look at the instructions. And I think actually since then I at least read them first, or I try to, and of course more and more you learn to do that. And as you put together stuff. So David, I think what he did is he went back and said, is there some instructions or something for this? Because this is dangerous, And some things are just dangerous, I think I had two uncles that worked on the San Onofre nuclear plant. One was an engineer that worked right around the core, and one was an electrician that helped do the electrical for the nuclear power plant down there on the coast. And you get around that stuff, and the danger signs are just everywhere. Don't do this. Don't touch that. You'll be contaminated. So Chernobyl is, it's like Chernobyl. It's dangerous. You can't play with that. And we're saying this about nuclear energy. How much more, God? How much more? And so, David figures out the rule and how dangerous it is, and that God can react to our attitude, the irreverent act, and it does say something about our earnest religious attempts, because most of us, if you're sitting here listening to this, you're a little bit religious, and it says something also about the deadliness of sin. And that's one thing that seems to be missing in a lot of conversations. When you go to the New Testament and you hear the eyewitness accounts of people that knew and listened to Jesus up front right there, and we hear the stories back and we hear what he says, Jesus has an over-the-top reaction to all kinds of sinful things. Oh my gosh. He said, if your eye makes you sin, in other words, fellas, if you look too long at something, he said you should pull it out. He said, if your hand makes you sin, you should cut it off. That's pretty serious. It's kind of over the top, right? Right? Well, not with God. You say, oh, the Old Testament God is like that. No, actually, Jesus was like that too. We understand Jesus to be God in the flesh, God in the bod. So, this irreverent act, and I guess it's kind of like people, I think of what's something that's irreverent, and I guess I think about the marriage relationship. I mean, imagine a man that has grown cold towards his wife, and he starts doing philandering, doing things, and he never talks to her, and then one day he just comes and he's not interested in her. They're far from intimacy, far. And he comes home one day, and then he just brings flowers. And he says, honey, I just want everything to be okay, so here's some flowers. What's wrong with that picture? There's a lot wrong with that picture. That's not going to work. That this great distance from God, and we don't know about Uzzah. We don't know, but David named it Perez Uzzah. God broke out, And so that can be difficult to understand, but just so you know, those are some of the things that are at play in this as we seek to understand, more about this story. And so there was this David's desire for the ark, and then the danger, it happened, the bad thing happened, and we're like, oh, wow, God still do that? And then deliverance, we see deliverance, and that's the third point. So here's the interesting thing. So that terrible thing happened, David's celebrating, bad news. It's like going to church and, there's nothing like, there's a really good way to ruin a church service. Someone dies in it, and you're calling hall ambulance and the fire trucks are out there. And I'm telling you, the worship is over. The sermon's done. People are like, I'm getting out of here. This is not safe. That's kind of what happens, But interesting enough about this little story is that right after that, and then we'll talk about the deliverance, is that when that happened to Uzzah, they put the the box, God's box, in this other guy's backyard. It'd be like, hey, can I put some nuclear waste in your backyard? You won't mind if it sits out there, will you? And so they put it in this guy. His name is Obed-Edom. Obed-Edom. You always wonder where Star Wars gets their names. A lot of Bible names in there. So Obed-Edom, it says that what happens at Obed's house is all of a sudden he becomes blessed. And then he's blessed so much that the word, as gossip flies, gets all the way up to David. Hey, you know where you left the ark? That dude's doing great, man. His flocks are growing, everything. It's just like gangbusters at his house. Everything's so good. And so David has a reaction. He said, we got to get that ark. He wants the ark again. And so he went and read the instructions, and the instructions go like this. With God's box, the ark, there's some ringlets, and you're supposed to put poles on it, and you're supposed to carry it on your shoulder. That's pretty simplistic. Just do that. Oh, yeah, and the guys that carry it should be Levites. There'll be a certain priest. They're sons of Levites. And sons of Levi carry it. And so they read the instructions. And then it says David, not only did he do that, but about every 7 steps, they'd sacrifice an animal. They'd offer a blood offering. In that culture, in that time, as strange as it seems to us, they sacrificed animals just like we swipe our ATM cards. It was just a normal part of life. We've offended God, we got to do this. We've offended God, we got to do this. And so David did that. And they would take 7 steps and then they would stop and do something. And so they headed to Jerusalem. And so, actually 6 steps, excuse me. And so they would have that blood offering. And so that leads us right to, because all of this leads us right to Jesus. It says in Hebrews chapter 9 that by his own blood he entered the Holy of the Holies. By his own blood, not animals, not anything, but his own. And he made the final sacrifice. No more sacrifices needed to be close to God. You can have access. And so, in that moment, isn't it interesting? This story, 1,100 years prior to Christ, this story, we see that in order for Israel to be close to God, there has to be a sacrifice. There is no access. You cannot get in the throne room. You can't see the president, the general, the president of the country, whatever works for your imagination. And David found success as he brought the ark in, and now the dance. So there, he desired it. He found danger and destruction, and then finally he's delivering the ark to Jerusalem, and then he finds a dance. In verse 14 and 15, we see that David dances. What a wonderful thing. And he dances, and he actually, and I would say to you, when's the last time you danced? Do you like dancing? I liked dancing when I was younger, but David danced in verses 14. It says with all his might. He was exuberant. He was excited. He was bubbling over with excitement because why? Because God was coming. Because God accepted what they did. They got the ark, and he's dancing, and he strips down to his underwear. It says he was in an ephod. It's just like, a bit of a skirt left on his midsection, and he's dancing. And he wasn't dancing because Uzzah died, and he wasn't dancing because Obed-Edom got blessed by having the ark like a lucky rabbit's foot or something. He was dancing because he was already now reminded and accepted by God. He wasn't dancing because he did something. He was dancing because God was with him. And I'm telling you what, if you can't dance in life, life without joy is just a hike. It's just a hike. It's just get up every day, throw the pack on, go to work. It's just in and out. But David was so excited about what he found in God that he found this self-forgetfulness that is one of the best characteristics of Christians when they are completely overwhelmed by the understanding of God's acceptance of them in spite of their sinful nature, in spite of their evil ways, and that God has forgiven them, and God made it happen. They didn't make it happen. We didn't hustle the ark in. David couldn't hustle the ark in. He had to listen to God, and he let go. He let go of himself, and he danced before all of Israel, all the people watching their king in his underwear, dancing all the way into town. Now, Saul wouldn't do that because it wasn't dignified. It's not dignified. And so, dancing. I like dancing. I was in high school. I'm going to confess, I practiced a few dance moves. And they got pretty silky, some of them. Some people thought I could dance. They didn't know how much I'd practiced, but you just pull them out and people are amazed for a moment, But so dancing, but David, I don't think David had perfect moves. I don't know that it was a great looking dance, but he was just so out of control. I kind of, to me, kind of looked like a dancing chimpanzee or something. He didn't care. And he walks in there, he comes into town, and what happens? One of his ex-wives, Michal, Saul's daughter, sees him in this passage. You see, sees him, and she really thinks he's a fool. And she really says, "You've exposed yourself," even like his nakedness, to slave girls and everything. You shouldn't do that. That was wrong. You're foolish. And it's interesting in that same passage that they said Michal had no more kids with David after that. No more kids. No kids. The fruitfulness from him is gone for her. And so what is this saying? I mean, what does this really say for us? I tell you what it says is that the only people, the only church and people and Christians that have an amazing sense of God's grace can be nurturing to other people. Can say, "Come on in. It's for everybody. Come on in. Jesus loves you. He loves me, and it's amazing that he loved me. He loves you too." And that is exactly the heart of a church, of a Christian person that can love and bring people into the circle of God. You see, Jesus, how Jesus gathered people was agape love. That's the great thing in history when they keep looking at Jesus and saying, "Oh my, how did he get all those people to gather around him like that? And how did it progress in such a amazing, loving way?" Well, it was him. And everybody was amazed that he was their friend. Where's that come from? It's amazing grace. It's amazing grace. So, here's maybe a way to look at it. How serious do you take God? How serious do you take the cross? You see, down that long corridor of history, that little incident with Uzzah and David and the ark, long down that history, there was something coming, and it was the cross. It was Jesus on the cross. It was God on the cross, and God's on the cross. Why is he up there? To love us, because that's how serious it was, what had to be done to fix it. And when you see that, you can take God serious and not take yourself so serious. And some of you have found, and you know that when you start taking God serious, other people are going to question you, just like David was questioned by one of his ex-wives. But trust the Lord and learn to dance. He is the Lord of the dance. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this day. It's incredible what you do for us, what we cannot do for ourselves. We are not enough, but you sent Jesus, who was enough, satisfied what we need satisfied, forgave us, loved us, cared for us, showed us grace, walked with us, called us friends, and loved us to the end. And we come to you, just, Lord, remind us. Let your Spirit run free even as we speak on these screens to people on their couches. Let them hear once again the grace of God's call on their life. In Christ's name, amen.